Where does a person's politics come from? What makes one person a Democrat or a Republican, a liberal or a conservative, an apathetic non-voter or an apoplectic activist? Well, the contributing factors are multivarious, of course, but is there a simple model that's useful? I propose that a person's politics is most effectively explained and categorized by one thing: narrative. Other factors may more strongly determine why a person believes what they believe, but narrative is most important because it's the factor we can best influence. We can't change, say, a person's identity or family, but we can sell them a story. So what are political narratives, and how are they distinct from the general category of political ideas? A person can have many political narratives in their head, some of them about very specific actors and incidents, e.g. Hillary Clinton is a crook, or Hillary Clinton had the election stolen from her. At the core of a person's politics, though, are grander stories about what's wrong with the world, how it got to be this way, and what should be done about it. Humans being humans, we gravitate towards stories with human actors, clear heroes, villains, and innocent victims and bystanders. These political narratives have several notable properties. First, the narratives in a person's head can and often do lack any coherent ideology. A person needn't consciously understand a story and all of its implications to like it, so nothing really stops them from liking two conflicting stories. Second, the narratives a person adopts tend to be strongly determined by their tribe, the social circle and identity group in which they've invested their sense of self. Adopting narratives disfavored by a person's tribe threatens the tribe and their status within it, so it's rarely done. Third, most people develop their narratives in the formative years of their teens and 20s. Again, tribal affinity has the strongest influence, but ideas and arguments can have impact, especially in this phase. Fourth, while some people passively avoid developing strong narratives and so remain on the sidelines, some political dropouts form strong narratives that actively reject political participation. The attitude is, politics is bad, and so I'm correct to disdain it. Fifth, once a person adopts strong narratives, they rarely change their minds. Luckily, though, people die and get replaced, so we're not stuck with the same politics forever. This means that dominant narratives do shift over the long term, but they shift slowly enough that politics usually seems stagnant from one election to the next. Lastly, what makes narrative so important is that people filter new information and arguments through their tribal affinity and narratives. If political persuasion seems hopeless, it's because we tend to ignore or rationalize away anything that threatens our social and narrative commitments. So can this deadlock be broken? Well, to make political persuasion possible, you first need to understand the narratives in everyone's heads, the narratives of your opponents, the narratives of uncommitted bystanders, and the narratives of your own side. The question then is, what in these narratives appeals to people or turns them off? Once you understand these narratives, the second important thing is to not get caught up by ephemeral news cycles. To those not already strongly invested in left and right narratives, the daily rancor of American discourse feels overblown or even meaningless, a symptom of a dysfunctional politics. The proper thing to do instead is focus long-term on the big ideas, not minutiae. Sell your core narratives and undermine the core narratives of your opponents. Now at best, you'll win very few converts from the other side, but over the long run, you can imbue your core narratives in more young people and bring some of the disengaged off the sidelines. So if you're going to sell a narrative, it's important to understand what turns people off. First, people will of course reject narratives that cast them as villains. People like being the hero of the story, or at least a victim or innocent bystander. Second, people also tend to dismiss acrimony as self-interested and attention-seeking. Until they share your narratives, they're not going to share your outrage. Expecting otherwise tends to push people away. Third, be careful about making spurious or specious arguments. An argument that seems plausible and fair to you might strike others as motivated reasoning if they can find even small holes. Until they agree with you on the big things, they won't cut you slack on the little things. Similarly, your narrative must accord with the world as they have observed and experienced it. Perhaps they lack the perspective you do, but it's your job to find the angle that fits their understanding. Lastly, humans, again, prefer stories with clear heroes and villains. Even when your audience accepts your narrative as valid, without heroes and villains, they might just not care. Now let's dive a bit into the major narratives within American politics. I see four broad categories: left, right, centrist, and what I call anti-politics. First, the left. Left-wing ideology is about equality and egalitarianism, but left-wing narrative is about oppression. Some group of people suffers at the hands of some more powerful group. There are many variants of this narrative, most obviously oppression of the poor, oppression of non-whites, oppression of non-males and sexual minorities, and oppression of non-Christians. The right, by this definition, is pretty much a mirror of the left. While right-wing ideology is about inequality and supremacy, right-wing narrative is about erosion of natural hierarchy. An interesting asymmetry between left and right narratives is their time frames. In left narratives, oppression is long-standing, stretching back at least through all of modern history. In right narratives, natural hierarchy has eroded only in recent generations. The left often identifies as progressive because their goal is to overcome what they see as a dark status quo. The right is often called reactionary because their goal is restoration after what they see as a fallen state. Centrist ideology is all about upholding the status quo, which today is ecumenical neoliberalism. Centrists see no heroes and villains, for we are all equally children of the market. To the extent oppression might still exist, it's not the fault of any oppressors, but rather a technocratic problem to be solved with the right incentive structures. The poor are not wicked, but they must be made better in the eyes of the market. To solve the problems of the world, there's no alternative but to do more of what we've already been doing. That's centrist ideology. In the centrist narrative, everything is basically fine and getting better, except centrists fear that people saying otherwise might ruin everything. So whereas the right sees good times in the past and the left sees good times in the future, for the center, the good times are now. Outside of comfortable elites, very few pure centrists exist. Bill Gates is the exemplar, and Steven Pinker is the prophet. Lastly, we have anti-politics, which is not a discernible ideology, yet still tells a story about the world. That is, politicians cannot be trusted, and our political system is broken. The most obvious variants of this story are pessimistic, but rhetoric about hope, change, bipartisanship, comity, and working across the aisle are positive spins on the same theme. Politics is a struggle for power, but anti-politics rationalizes dropping out of that struggle or pretending it can somehow be sidestepped. To be sure, these four major narratives are not mutually exclusive. Most centrists lean either left or right on various issues, and even left and right narratives can be mixed and matched across different domains. Many people claim to be socially liberal but fiscally conservative, and if you look beyond elites and pundits, you find many people with odder mixes of views. For example, a person may believe that women are oppressed by men, but also believe in the natural supremacy of whites over non-whites. So while there does seem to be a tendency for left and right convictions to come bundled as whole packages, this tendency is not a rule. Also be clear that mixing left and right narratives doesn't make someone a centrist. Centrists are defined by their support of the status quo, while left and right both oppose the status quo. Anti-politics in particular is broadly shared by everyone to some degree across left, right, and even the center. When centrists like Thomas Friedman praise the governing efficiency of China's autocracy, they're expressing their contempt for our politics, which is failing to proactively secure American dominance of the neoliberal world order as much as these centrists would like. Anyway, the point of all this is that I believe that classification of political beliefs can't be usefully captured by a one- or even two-dimensional axis spectrum of left to right or statist to anti-statist. To be sure, this narrative model also makes simplifications, but it better accounts for a large chunk of people who don't neatly fit on reductive spectrums. Most importantly, while a left-right spectrum model implies our politics is stuck in place, a narrative model implies a potential for change if you identify and pull on the right threads of narrative that are already in people's heads. In my next video then, I want to examine the narratives on the American left and try to nail down how different left factions think they are going to bring about change.